The French President Emmanuel Macron has defended recent comments on the role Europe might play in any escalation between China and the United States. Following a three-day visit to China, President Macron said that being an ally to the US does not mean being its vassal. His remarks have drawn criticism from politicians and other public figures on both sides of the Atlantic. Let's bring in Dr. Charles Miller, a political scientist at ANU. Charles, thanks for your time. What did you make of the comments from Macron? Did they come as a surprise?
I wouldn't have said so, really. I mean, there's a long tradition in French politics of chafing against the leadership of what they call the Anglo-Saxons, meaning essentially the Americans and the British in Western security. So this goes all the way back to Charles de Gaulle, and you will periodically see this from French presidents. You know, you saw this from Jacques Chirac. Now we're seeing it from Emmanuel Macron. The French do like to assert their independence from the United States from time to time, and this is another example of this. It is perhaps more surprising coming from Macron, who's sought to build better relations with Britain and the United States. But nonetheless, I mean, in the broader sweep of French sort of defence and security policy, it's not terribly surprising, I would say.
Yeah, the remarks where he says the worst thing would be to think that we Europeans must be followers and adapt ourselves to the American rhythm and a Chinese overreaction. So sort of in the middle of the two, but France and Europe are allies with the United States through NATO. So I guess we need to sort of see it through that prism as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've seen some interpretations of what Macron said that suggest that some of it was kind of lost in translation, and that also he has a tendency to go for kind of large sweeping statements that tend to be quite vague that we all then have to parse. And that is a problem with his rhetoric. But I think that the Europeans, along with some people in Australia, as we can see from what Paul Keating was saying a few weeks ago, are worried about what they think might be an American sort of lurch towards China. Now, I'm not saying that they're right to be concerned about this. I mean, the circumstances we are talking about, after all, would be a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. That would be a Chinese lurch towards war, not an American one. But nonetheless, this is a concern that is shared by a good number of people amongst America's allies. And I think it partly goes back to the legacy of the Iraq War, where, again, the perception is that the United States did lurch towards war and got a number of other countries brought into it on their coattails. And so I think it really needs to be seen in that kind of context. But I think it's also important to remember that he, at the same time, talked about a Chinese overreaction too. So he's certainly not saying that Europe or France would be neutral in the event of a war between the United States and China over Taiwan. It would very much depend on the circumstances under which it came about.
He talks about the need for strategic autonomy for Europe. How do other leaders in Europe see his remarks and the situation for Europe in relation to the United States and China tensions?
Well, it depends. I mean, some of the stuff he said about strategic autonomy actually refers to things like energy independence, which in turn touches on nuclear power. So one of the problems that Europe had in responding to Russia prior to the Ukraine war was its dependence on Russian oil and gas. And obviously the French have a very vibrant nuclear industry, and the Germans have just shut theirs down. So this obviously is something that would be expected not to play terribly well in Berlin. Simultaneously, I'm not sure that there is the sort of political will in Germany to boost up defence spending, which is what European strategic autonomy would mean as well, and to rebuild and recapitalise the European defence industry. So I think actually this is something that I think would cause a lot of problems for the German government as well as for other countries. Also, I mean, there are many countries in Europe that aside from the UK, which take a very pro-American stance in defence and security policy. So Poland, many of the Baltic countries as well, I think that you can expect them to be a little bit wary about some of the things that Macron has said, especially given the history that he's had in attempting to get Vladimir Putin to come to talks.
Yeah, indeed. And you see the visit from Macron to Beijing. We've got a thaw in our trade relations with China. And the fact is, the size of China means it's an important trade and economic entity for many countries in Europe as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the thing. China might be a security threat, but it is definitely an economic opportunity. And I mean, we do not, I mean, I don't think anybody really wants, unless it were absolutely necessary for there to be a war involving China, because that would be a global catastrophe. And so I think that there is a definite desire on the part of most leaders around the world to try and do whatever is possible to sort of bring relations between China and many other countries, especially the United States, back onto a kind of an even keel where there is less talk of war and more talk of trade. I mean, that's quite understandable, I think.
Political scientist at the ANU, Dr. Charles Miller, thank you. Appreciate your time.